Welcome to the Iowa Ag Podcast, where we talk about the nuanced topics of agriculture and try to bridge the urban-rural divide. I'm your host, David Geiger, here at the Jethro's Barbecue Studio. Happy to be here to start up a conversation about important issues on and off the farm. This is the Iowa Ag Podcast. Welcome to the Iowa Ag Podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger, and we are at the Jethro's Barbecue Studio and going to have a conversation about how the rural side of America works and functions with ethanol and how that then relates to urban America. And to do so, we have with us the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association executive officer here. I'm going to have to redo that. My brain completely... Executive director. I almost got there.
It doesn't matter.
I almost got there. We're going to do that one more time. I'm a king of false starts. Don't ever get me on the football field. All right. Welcome to the Iowa Ag Podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger, and we're going to take a look at ethanol production, how that affects rural and urban America. And to do so, we are going to be joined with Monte Shaw, the Executive Director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. Thank you so much, Monte, for joining us. As a side note, this is the Jethro's Barbecue Studio, and we are glad to be a part of that team here with the Iowa Podcast folk, and appreciate you joining in on this show. All right, Monte, let's go over some of that rural America, urban America divide to start off with. And one of the ways that we have a very easy, visible, aspect of that is ethanol and ethanol production. Could you just break down, just to start things off, on how the rural economy is affected by the rise of ethanol over the last 2-3 decades?
Yeah, I mean, without going into too deep of a history lesson, many people my age or older would remember the 1980s farm crisis. If you're your age, you probably read about it in a grade school, history chapter, on Iowa history. But the 1980s was a really horrible time to come of age as a farm kid. The farm economy was literally in the farm crisis. I mean, capital T, capital F, capital C, the farm crisis. And farmers were losing their farms. There were suicides. It was not good, and just oversupply. What most people don't realize is that the 90s, we really hadn't solved it. We just had better farm support programs put in place out of Washington, D.C. that kind of mitigated some of the problems. But, I mean, farmers farmed, and they lost money, and then they received a check from the government to be made whole. It was not what they wanted, but otherwise you're going to lose your farm. And so really it wasn't until the biofuels, and starting with ethanol, then going on into biodiesel and some other things, came along and really took off in the early 2000s, that we created a market that sucked up the excess supply that was out there. And then that links, and then we've done that. I could go to why we're actually teetering on the edge of a new farm crisis, but I think the link to urban is go to your gas station. If you drive a car and you go to the gas station, chances are you're filling up with either E10, or now in Iowa we have pretty ubiquitous access to what's called E15. Sometimes it's marketed as unleaded 88, which is 5% more ethanol. And you'll see, if you look at the different prices there on all the different buttons, you save a lot of money with ethanol. So that really rescued rural Iowa, rural America out of the 80s and 90s, and gave us really 20 good years. You could argue the best 20 years in a row of American agriculture. Now we've kind of saturated that 10% ethanol market. So if we don't do something new, and we can dig into that if you want, we're starting to see farmers do what they always do. I mean, never get, if you want to make a solid bet in life, it's give an American farmer a market and watch them overproduce it. That's the history of American agriculture for 250 years, because they're so competitive, they're so innovative. The technology is amazing, and that's what happens. But I would say that's, what ethanol has meant is a demand driver that's really helped us have markets for our farmers. And then the side benefits are, because we're making that low-cost renewable fuel, you're saving money at the pump. Just go look at the blend. You can find pumps that sell gasoline without ethanol, and it's a lot more expensive. And the other side is that ethanol just comes from the starch in the corn. That's another thing that a lot of folks in urban areas, I think in Iowa we get it, but if you're talking like urban West Coast or urban East Coast, they think that corn goes into an ethanol plant and just disappears. Like, oh, why are you burning my food? We're not. We're using the starch. Plenty of starch in the world.
And that creates distillers dried grain, which is commonly known as DDGs.
Yep. So we just use the starch for ethanol. All the protein goes out the plant back into the livestock market, feed market, as distillers grains, DDGs. It's a high protein animal feed. And so we actually make meat less expensive than it would otherwise be, because we also turn this corn into this really quality and affordable high protein feed. And so, you don't really have a comparison price at the store. Like, oh, here's one that has distillers, here's one that doesn't. It's just kind of in the market. But consumers are saving at the pump and they're saving at the meat counter all the time that we're driving the rural economy. So it's really pretty cool.
I think a part of what you just said there makes it a global market as well. It is something that allows for global exports. It's also something that allows for increased demand, because when you're talking about increased production, when you're talking about better logistics, better preservation systems, better transportation systems, and access and relationships with global countries and markets, there is only a limited number of people on the planet. And while it's growing, it does not necessarily equate the growth in our ability to produce food. So you need to have alternative methods if you want to produce more and succeed as a small business owner as a farmer.
Absolutely. I was just last week out at the Global Ethanol Summit in Washington, D.C., where 34 countries sent delegations, business delegations, government delegations, to come and learn about ethanol and how we can export it. We're going to export a couple billion gallons of ethanol this year. We use about 14 billion domestically. And we could produce billions and billions more. We have the corn to do it, and we have the capacity to convert that corn into ethanol and those products like the distillers grains, the livestock feed that we talked about. So, on how it connects us and everything, we're not taking corn away from other markets. If you go back to the year 2000 and you look at the amount of corn that was going directly into animal feed, directly into exports, unprocessed, no value added, and directly into all these other uses, industrial uses and other things, all of those numbers are the same. But we've taken, I guess I should know this off the top of my head, but I got to do some math. Over 5 billion bushels of corn that didn't exist in 2000. And people are like, oh, well, you must be planting a lot more corn. Actually, the total acres planted to principal crops has gone down by about 1.5 million acres a year because of urban sprawl. So the amount of land that farmers are farming is actually being reduced year after year, but they're being more productive with the land that's still in production. Now, there are some shifts between, say, we don't produce as much tobacco or cotton as we used to because the tobacco market's gone away. Cotton, other countries have figured out how to do it. And so corn has filled in some of that compared to where it was 20 years ago, but we still plant less corn than we did in the 1940s and 50s, and yet acres. But on those acres, we're getting huge yields. I mean, when I was a kid, like I mentioned, in the 80s, if we hit 100 bushel an acre, we were pretty happy. Now, I call my dad and brother and say, hey, are we cracking 200 bushels an acre? And if we're not, I'm going to be pretty mad at him. Like, unless it was a really bad weather year, I'm going to say, hey, how'd you guys screw this up? And that's not even the good farmland in Iowa. I mean, there's farmers that if they're not making 250, 275 bushel an acre, something went wrong.
Right.
And it's amazing how many farmers are now cracking 300 bushel an acre on a field by field basis. So we have this productivity that's out there that's not stopping. That is actually, to your point, accelerating faster than population growth. In 10,000 years of recorded human history, every now and again, somebody, what was it, Malthusian? I don't know. But I mean, there's always someone that comes up and does some math and is like, oh my God, we're going to starve to death because, the population's growing. But they always look at the supply of food in a static way. And if you take even a few seconds to look at agriculture, It's more impressive than the space program. What has happened since the 1940s to today is more impressive than the space program. But we just take it for granted because we have cheap food in the grocery store and we go buy it. But the technology and the innovations there and the productivity gains are probably one of the top 3 most impressive stories, along with, I don't know what you call computers and technology and whatever all that is, of the last, 50 to 75 years.
With all that innovation and increase in production, I was speaking with some guests a few weeks ago, and we also have had the World Food Prize in town here in the Des Moines area. There is some concerns about the diversification aspect of agriculture. Is there a way to include diversification not only within the product of producing corn and soybeans and having that create, a diversification of products, but also having a diversification on the farm when it comes to livestock and maybe some small crops? Can we have an ethanol industry that involves some smaller crops as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's market driven. You have these people that, I don't want to even reference who it was because I don't want to bring up their name, but there was a recent person who used to be involved in Iowa politics who recently said, I guess ethanol wasn't all I thought it was back in the day, because here we are on the verge of another farm crisis. And it's like, but it gave you it pulled you out of a 20-year farm crisis and gave you another 20 years of prosperity that was unprecedented in rural America. And yes, now because we've tapped out the current market, people are like, oh, it won't fix all our problems. Actually, hey, start selling E15 blends around the country and we end the current farm crisis. And then longer term, because farmers are going to keep going, right? There's huge new markets like in marine vessels, aviation fuel. John Deere's working on tractors that would run on basically E100 instead of diesel. So there's a lot of, I think the new solution for the next, what's potentially the next farm crisis is kind of the same solution as the last one, only different because we're doing it better and it's different markets. So to go back to your question, nostalgia is not a strategic plan. You cannot feed the population of this world with everybody having a couple chickens in the backyard and planting some oats for the milk cow and different things like that. That's just not efficient. Now, if you want to go back to that method, I mean, you're going to, right now, if you live in the United States of America and you're listening to this, you have the privilege of paying the smallest percentage of your paycheck for food of any country in the world. Now, if we want to double, triple, quadruple that, we could set up a system through policy that would make us more diverse and less efficient and a lot more, and you're going to pay a lot more for it. But, and you're probably going to, and well, you'll be fine because you could afford to pay twice as much for you don't think you can, but when you're hungry, believe me, you can pay twice as much for your food like Europe does than us, and you're not going to starve. But somebody in the world is going to starve to death. And that's the part that I don't like is they talk about, don't grow this, don't grow that. We talked about how ethanol plants use the starch, which is in abundance around the world, but protein is not. And affordable protein is not. And so the United States ethanol industry, I just heard this last week. I hope I have the number right. That distiller's grains that ends up in as an animal feed, what we feed out and ends up as protein going into human bodies is the 200 plants around the United States that produce ethanol end up creating enough protein for 550 million people around the world to get their daily dose of protein. That's an amazing number. And if you want that to go away, that's okay, but just understand that you're probably starving people to death.
I think another idea I have along this scope, because I get that it is a market-based economy, and there's a reason why go ahead.
Can I add one thing? Because I didn't do justice to your question. I kind of answered a different question that I get hit all the time with, like, why do we do all this? But there is innovation going on. So there are companies right now, small tech companies, as well as some of the big brand names that you would know of in agriculture and seed technology that are looking at, hey, how can we diversify into maybe a 3-crop rotation with some, because there's a big move to do cover crops because it's better for the soil health. reduces runoff, and so water quality, stuff like that. So a lot of farmers are embracing cover crops. But right now, there's an expense to putting cover crops on in the fall. There's an expense to terminating them so that you can plant your commodity crop in the spring. And it's all expense for this kind of like generically, oh, we'll all have cleaner water. Well, with all due respect, very few people in the cities just go out and spend their own money so that other people can have cleaner water. So why would you expect a farmer to do that? But so can we take that cover crop and turn it into, say, a winter crop, but where you can harvest an oil seed off of it in the spring, and then that's another use. You're getting better soil because you're having more activity all the time. You're getting better water quality. But now we've added an ability to actually pay for that expense. And by the way, that oil seed might go into creating sustainable aviation fuel or sustainable marine fuel. That's so we are looking at stuff like that. We're open to it, but I want folks who don't live on farms to understand that it's real. I have so many conversations like, well, why don't farmers do this? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, why don't you run your business in a way that makes it go broke? Yeah. Well, why would I do that? Well, okay, you just asked a farmer to do that. Farmers are responding to market signals just like any other business. And so while I think, we can look for technologies to do some of these things, and billions are being spent to try to develop this stuff. Until it's commercially viable, you're either going to need to have a government program that pays farmers to do it for the societal benefits,
right,
or you're going to have to wait till it's commercially viable. You should not expect a farmer to go out of business and lose their farm, for some idea of greater good. No other business segment in the world is expected to do that. It's kind of funny how we kind of expect farmers to do these things.
Right. There's this general expectation of feeding the world, which is a lot of pressure for a business to have, especially when it operates on thin margins. And as you said, in the 80s crisis and even the last few years, when you look at farm bankruptcies, all of that has been very difficult for producers to make those thinner margins, as it seems the only way to be a successful farmer is to be a bigger farmer. And I think I think you keyed in exactly on the question that I was asking there. And I guess the follow-up is there concerns, and you said billions are being spent into advocating for more innovation. Is there a concern of potentially just putting eggs in one basket, right? It doesn't mean ethanol has to not be there, but when you're only relying on one or two crops to produce it, are we just ignoring the opportunities and abilities of other crops?
So, I think that's a good question. As I mentioned, there's what we call acres planted to principal crops. I can't remember, 7 or 8 principal crops. It's corn, soybeans, wheat, sorghum. I think cotton, tobacco, some others were in there. And those acres are constantly shifting around the edges based on market signals. So there is competition for those acres out there. What we've seen, though, is because corn is such a productive plant and can be turned into so many different products. We're just talking about ethanol because that's the industry I represent.
Right.
But, I'm guessing there's some people who listen to this who might have some Lululemon products. Mm-hmm. That stretchy stuff, it comes from corn. Mm-hmm. Okay, that is a chemical that's created instead of from petroleum like it used to be, is actually now pulled out of the corn processing plants that we have right here in Iowa. So if you like your stretchy Lululemon pants, thank a corn farmer. And so what I would say is there's two ways of looking at that. We are seeing a incredible diversification of the uses of soybeans and corn. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just animal feed. It's not just exports, which is animal feed somewhere else. It's we're replacing petrochemicals. And so in products, if you buy DuPont carpet, it's corn. If you buy, like I said, more and more of these things. So we're seeing incredible diversification there, which I think prevents us from having that just be like a dead end. Now, then on the production side, on the soil side, basically since, Pioneer, Henry Wallace created hybrid corn, we have seen a steady and increase in productivity year after year. We're not seeing, if we hit a spot where all of a sudden yields are not increasing, and and quite frankly, they're increasing at an increasing rate here even all these, almost 100 years later, I guess. And if we saw changes like that, then that would be a problem. If we, people say, "Oh, well, you're wearing the soil out." Well, go look at a tobacco field. I mean, that wears soil out. Go look at some of these other things. So I think we have people graduating. So let me tell a little story. My grandpa probably didn't worry a whole lot about soil runoff. He when he was farming 50s, 60s, 70s, he probably just didn't worry. I mean,
You didn't think of it.
you're worried about
soil.
ruts and hitting them and breaking an axle on your tractor, but you had 8 feet. I'm exaggerating, but you had 8 feet of topsoil. It just wasn't a big deal. By the time my dad was farming in the 80s, we knew more, and he started. We did a whole bunch of different things, from contour farming and terracing, because we're down southwest Iowa where it's not flat, and we were one of the first in our area to start doing some no-till and different things to address that. But my dad's goal was simply to slow it down, slow down the loss of the soil organic carbon. We are graduating kids out of Iowa State for the last 10 years that have been taught how to actually build soil organic carbon up with different farming practices, from how you till or don't till, to cover crops, to different things. So we not only can stop what some people in the 70s would have looked at and correctly said, hey, that's not sustainable. We can not only slow it down, which was my dad's goal. My kids' generation, when they're finally allowed to make the decisions on the farm, it will take some time. But they have the knowledge and the tools to actually build soil organic carbon in the soil. That's good for soil productivity. That's what's good for water infiltration and water quality. It also means we're sequestering carbon for people who care about carbon emissions. It means we're actually sequestering carbon in our soils out of the atmosphere. So it checks a lot of boxes. So I think that the sustainability of modern agriculture is so much better than it was before. Now, have farms gotten bigger? Yes. I mean, but we say that and we look at it in our lifetime. Oh, geez, farms are getting bigger. Well, think of the average size of the farm in 1700 and 1800 and 1900. Right. It's been getting bigger from when we stopped farming with a stick poking a hole in the ground, right? Mm-hmm. So I look at manufacturing. We used to have little manufacturing all over the place, and now it's more efficient. We've gotten logistics so good, it's more efficient to have it in big places. I don't know as I like all of that. Right. Yeah. I mean, we're all kind of nostalgic for other times and youth, and there's certainly changes that go along with that. But I don't think farming is any different than any other industry that produces things. I mean, you can have a lot of little tech startups and stuff like that, even in industries that don't produce physical things, but produce services that are awesome. We all like to be able to Google, what the weather is today and stuff like that. But even those startups tend to get gobbled up over time by big things. So I just think when people look at that, I don't like it. I like the idea of having more farm families out there as opposed to fewer. But I also look at it in the scope of history, and in looking at other industries, it's not really an anomaly. I'm not. I'd love to hit that. I tell people this all the time, because right now I really think we're hitting a period where, and this is something that used to be more urban, I thought. Now I'm seeing it more in rural areas. But like the NIMBY, not in my backyard, we have a lot of people that just don't want anything to change. Oh, new factory, no. Or new this, or and it's like, well, wait a minute, how are we going to have an economy that creates jobs and employs people and build, if we stop building things, in my opinion, we're going to be in big trouble. And so I would just say that we really need to embrace the ability to, we all wish there's a giant red pause button and we'd pick a great year for farming profitability and we just pause it. And for me, that might have been in the I'd have to go back and pick one in the 2000, the aughts, I don't know what else you call them, or the teens, where we had a nice sweet spot. For somebody else, it might be back in the 50s. We had a couple of really good years in the 50s. You would have had a lot more farm families, a lot more diversification on the farm. It wasn't so specialized. And they'd be like, oh, that is the ideal. And you'd hit that red button and you'd pause it there. Well, the problem is that giant red pause button does not exist. And so if you want to stay competitive and you want to, keep our food prices low and you want to keep our energy prices low, then we need to give our current farmers the tools that they need to be competitive in today's world, not in the 1970s, not in the 1950s. Nostalgia is not a strategic plan for success going forward. I like it. It's tempting. We love that rearview mirror, but if you try to drive a car by looking at the rearview mirror, you're going to end up in a ditch.
Monte, there's a dozen more questions I could ask you. I'll have to ask you on the program again, especially talking and relating more about the carbon capture aspect of ethanol and ethanol production. But I think we've run out of time for now. Thank you so much. Monte Shaw is the executive director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. Monte, thank you so much for joining us on the Iowa Ag Podcast.
Thank you. Happy to do it.
Again, I'm your host, David Geiger, here at the Jethro's Barbecue Studio, the Iowa Ag Podcast here. Feel free to check out my other work that I do as well. I have Farm Here Daily, which is a podcast I do Monday through Friday. You can check that out at fieldforwardmedia.com. And we'll be back again next week. Have a good week, everybody.